May 5, 1945. Castle Itter, Austrian Alps. The war in Europe had less than 3 days left to live. Berlin had already fallen. Adolf Hitler was dead. German armies were surrendering by the hour. Across Austria, exhausted soldiers were throwing away their rifles and trying to disappear before the Americans arrived. Everyone believed the fighting was almost over. Everyone was wrong. High above the village of Itter stood a medieval stone fortress surrounded by forests and steep mountain roads. For centuries it had been a castle. Now it had become something else. A prison. Not for ordinary soldiers, not for spies, but for some of the most important prisoners in Nazi Germany. Former French prime ministers, generals, tennis champions, trade union leaders, members of Charles de Gaulle's government, men the Nazis considered valuable enough to keep alive, and dangerous enough never to release. Inside the castle, the prisoners had spent months listening to artillery echo through the mountains. Every explosion sounded closer than the last. Every day brought new rumors. Hitler was dead. The Americans were near. The SS were retreating. Germany was collapsing. Nobody knew which rumors were true. Nobody knew if liberation would arrive, or execution, because throughout the Third Reich, something terrifying was happening. As Germany collapsed, many Waffen-SS units refused to surrender. Instead, they received different orders. Destroy evidence. Kill prisoners. Leave nothing behind. Entire prison camps were being evacuated. Columns of prisoners were forced onto death marches. Thousands never reached their destination. The men inside Castle Itter knew exactly what that could mean. If the SS decided they were no longer useful, they would not survive the day. Only a few miles away, another man was reaching the same conclusion. Major Josef Gangl, a decorated officer in the German Wehrmacht. 4 years earlier, he had marched across Europe wearing the uniform of Hitler's army. Now he wanted only one thing: to stop the SS. Gangl had watched Germany destroy itself. He had watched cities disappear beneath Allied bombing. He had watched experienced soldiers sacrificed for hopeless orders. He had watched teenagers handed rifles and told to stop tanks. Enough! The war was over. At least it should have been. But not everyone accepted reality. The Waffen-SS still roamed the countryside. Unlike many regular army officers, they had no interest in surrender. To them, anyone who talked about peace was a traitor. Gangl knew something else. If the SS reached Castle Itter first, every prisoner inside would be killed. He had fewer than 20 loyal soldiers left, against hundreds of SS troops. It wasn't enough, not even close. There was only one army nearby capable of helping: the Americans. Just days earlier, asking American soldiers for assistance would have been unimaginable. For almost 6 years, they had been enemies. Now, they might become allies. Several kilometers away, Captain John C. Jack Lee, Jr. of the U.S. 23rd Tank Battalion was leading his column through the Austrian countryside. The roads were crowded. German civilians carrying white flags, former soldiers trying to surrender, destroyed trucks abandoned beside the road. The smell of smoke lingered in the mountain air. Lee had seen enough combat to know one simple rule: the most dangerous days of any war were often the last ones. Desperate men made desperate decisions. Suddenly, one of his scouts reported something unexpected. A German officer was approaching under a white flag, alone, unarmed. Lee watched carefully. His tank crews trained their machine guns toward the road. No one trusted surprises in enemy territory. The German stopped several yards away. He raised both hands. Then, in careful English, he spoke. "I need your help." The American soldiers exchanged confused glances. "Help? From an enemy officer?" Lee stepped forward. "Who are you?" The German stood perfectly still. "Major Josef Gangl." He hesitated. "There are civilians and important French prisoners. They are trapped inside Castle Itter. The SS are coming. If we do nothing, they will all die." For several long seconds, nobody spoke. Only days earlier, this same German officer had worn the uniform of the enemy. Now he was asking American soldiers to fight beside him. It sounded impossible. It sounded like a trap. Yet something about Gangl's face told Lee otherwise. exhaustion, determination, and something else. A man who had already chosen which side of history he wanted to stand on. Captain Lee studied him carefully. Every instinct told him to be cautious, but another instinct, one developed after years of war, told him the German was telling the truth. If he was wrong, he could lose every man under his command. If he was right, hundreds of innocent lives might depend on a decision made in the next 60 seconds. Lee looked toward the mountains. Somewhere beyond them, a medieval castle waited. Inside, French prisoners had no idea whether rescue was coming. Outside, the Waffen-SS were already moving. Captain Jack Lee took one slow breath. Then he made a decision that would become one of the strangest moments in American military history. He looked Major Josef Gangl directly in the eyes. "Show us the way." Captain Jack Lee did not answer immediately. He had spent months fighting German soldiers across France and into Germany. Some of his own men had been killed by officers wearing the same uniform. Major Josef Gangl wore now, trust was not something given lightly. It had to be earned. Lee studied the German officer for several long seconds. Gangl never looked away. "I can prove it," he finally said. The prisoners include former French Prime Ministers Édouard Daladier and Paul Reynaud, General Maurice Gamelin, Jean Borotra, and several other important political prisoners. Lee knew some of those names. If Gangl was lying, he had done his homework. If he was telling the truth, those prisoners were worth saving. More importantly, the SS could not be allowed to murder them only hours before the war ended. Lee made his decision. "We're going." The American force was small, far smaller than anyone would have chosen for a rescue mission. Lee had only a handful of Sherman tanks available. Most had already been assigned elsewhere as the German surrender accelerated. Across Austria, he selected one Sherman tank, nicknamed Besotten Jenny, along with a small group of infantrymen from Company B, barely more than a dozen Americans. Not nearly enough for what might be waiting ahead. Gangl returned to his own men. His command had shrunk dramatically during the previous days. Many German soldiers had simply gone home. Others had surrendered. Only a small group remained with him. Not because they believed Germany could still win, because they believed innocent people should not die after the war was already lost. Some had hidden Austrian resistance fighters. Others had openly refused SS orders. If captured, the SS would almost certainly execute them. There would be no mercy. Not from their own countrymen. The strange convoy rolled toward Castle Itter. At the front, an American Sherman tank. Behind it, American jeeps. Mixed among them, German Wehrmacht trucks carrying soldiers who only days earlier had been enemies. Villagers watched in disbelief. Some crossed themselves. Others simply stared. Nobody had ever imagined seeing American stars painted beside German helmets. One elderly Austrian woman later recalled seeing the convoy pass through her village. She could not understand what she was looking at. For a moment, she wondered whether the war itself had gone mad. The mountain road became narrower. Dense forests surrounded both sides. Perfect country for an ambush. Every bend forced the Sherman to slow. Every bridge had to be checked. The silence felt unnatural. Lee knew the SS were somewhere nearby. The only question was, how close? High above them. Inside Castle Itter, the prisoners were becoming increasingly desperate. The commandant had already abandoned the castle. Most of the guards had disappeared. Food was running low. Telephone lines no longer worked. Nobody knew who controlled the surrounding countryside. French tennis champion Jean Borotra had volunteered for an almost impossible mission. Escape the castle. Find Allied troops. Bring them back. He slipped through the gates the previous day, crossed forests, avoided German patrols, and eventually located members of the Austrian resistance. It was through this desperate chain of events that Gangl had learned the castle was in danger. Time was running out. Late that afternoon, Lee's convoy finally reached the medieval fortress. The heavy wooden gates opened. The prisoners stepped outside cautiously. Many looked shocked. Not by the Americans, by the Germans standing beside them. Former enemies now protecting them. Édouard Daladier stared at Gangl in disbelief. "You are helping us?" Gangl answered quietly. "The war is finished." No one argued. There was no time. Lee immediately inspected the castle. It looked impressive from the outside. Inside, it was a nightmare to defend. Thick medieval walls protected parts of the structure. But they also created blind spots. Several nearby hills overlooked the castle. Perfect firing positions. If the SS brought anti-tank weapons, the defenders would be trapped. Lee positioned Besotten Jenny outside the main gate to command the approach road. American machine guns covered the walls. German soldiers reinforced windows with furniture and sandbags. The French prisoners refused to hide. Some even volunteered to carry ammunition. Former politicians, former generals, former cabinet ministers, working beside American infantrymen and German soldiers. History had never produced a battlefield quite like this. As darkness settled over the Austrian mountains, the defenders counted their strength. 14 American soldiers, around a dozen Wehrmacht troops loyal to Major Gangl, several armed resistance fighters, a handful of French prisoners willing to fight. Less than 40 defenders in total. Lee looked toward the tree line. If they come, they'll come before sunrise. Gangl nodded. He knew the SS. Night attacks were their specialty. The defenders checked their rifles, loaded machine guns, distributed grenades. No one spoke very much. Everyone understood the odds. Outside the castle, the forest remained silent. Too silent. Then, just before dawn, one American sentry heard something. Branches breaking, boots moving through wet leaves. Not one man, many. He slowly raised his rifle and whispered the only warning the castle would receive. They're here. The first shot came just after sunrise. It echoed through the valley. Then another. Then dozens. Machine gun fire burst from the tree line surrounding Castle Itter. Bullets slammed into the ancient stone walls. American soldiers dove for cover. German Wehrmacht troops returned fire almost instantly. The battle had begun. Ironically, it was German soldiers shooting at German soldiers. Only this time, they were fighting for completely different Germanys. Captain Jack Lee climbed onto the castle wall with a pair of binoculars. The morning mist still hung over the forest. It made identifying targets almost impossible. Then movement. Dark uniforms, camouflaged smocks, steel helmets emerging between the trees. Not retreating soldiers, not frightened conscripts. These were Waffen-SS veterans, well-armed, well-organized, and determined to finish one final mission before the war officially ended. Lee counted quickly. 20, 30, then more. Far too many. They've got at least 100, one American muttered. Gangl looked through another set of binoculars. His face hardened. More. He lowered them. Much more. The SS commander understood something immediately. The castle was stronger than it looked. Charging across open ground would be suicide. Instead, they surrounded it. Machine guns opened from multiple directions. Rifle fire rained against every window. Every exposed position became dangerous. The defenders answered carefully. Every bullet mattered. Resupply wasn't coming. Outside the front gate, Besotten Jenny became the castle's strongest weapon. Its 75mm cannon roared across the valley. One shell exploded inside a wooded position. Another shattered an advancing machine gun nest. The tank's coaxial machine gun swept the hillside. The SS attack stalled. For a moment, the Americans believed they had stopped it. Then the Germans brought forward an anti-tank gun, hidden among the trees, almost invisible. One flash, one deafening explosion. The shell slammed directly into the Sherman. Metal flew across the courtyard. Smoke poured from the engine compartment. The crew escaped, but the tank was finished. Castle Itter had just lost its biggest advantage. The SS commander seized the moment. Machine guns intensified. Snipers targeted every opening. The defenders could barely lift their heads above the walls. Stone chipped away under constant impacts. Dust filled the corridors. Ancient windows exploded inward. The medieval fortress had survived centuries. Now, it was under its most unusual siege. Inside the castle, something remarkable happened. The French prisoners refused to remain spectators. Former Prime Minister Paul Reynaud helped carry ammunition between firing positions. General Maurice Gamelin, once commander of the French army, assisted in organizing defensive sectors despite having spent years as a prisoner. Jean Borotra, the former Wimbledon champion, volunteered for the most dangerous task of all. Captain Lee looked at him. "We need help. Our radio's gone. The nearest American unit has no idea we're here." Borotra didn't hesitate. "I'll go." Lee stared at him. Outside the walls, more than 100 SS soldiers surrounded the castle. Crossing that ground meant almost certain death. "You understand what you're volunteering for?" Borotra nodded. "If I stay, we all die." Using a section of the castle wall hidden from the main German positions, Borotra climbed down, dropped into the trees, and disappeared into the forest. The defenders watched silently. No one expected to see him again. Now they could only wait and fight. The SS tightened the ring around Castle Itter. Every hour, they moved closer. Every hour. The defenders had fewer rounds of ammunition. Captain Lee walked along the firing positions, checking every man. American. German. It no longer mattered. Nobody was asking who had worn which uniform a week earlier. There were only two sides now: the men inside the castle and the men trying to destroy it. Major Josef Gangl stopped beside Lee. Quietly he said, "If they break through, they'll kill everyone." Lee nodded. "I know." Gangl looked toward the smoke rising from the disabled Sherman, then toward the surrounding forest. He had spent years fighting for Germany. Now, he was preparing to die protecting French prisoners. Beside American soldiers, history had taken a turn no one could have imagined. Then, from somewhere beyond the trees, the defenders heard a new sound. Not rifles, not machine guns, engines, heavy engines. Coming fast. No one inside the castle knew whether they belonged to the SS or to the Americans. For a few long seconds, everyone stopped shooting and listened. The engines grew louder. Then, an American voice echoed through the valley. "Hold your fire!" Seconds later, Sherman tanks burst through the trees. Half-tracks followed behind them. Infantry jumped from the vehicles before they had even stopped moving. Jean Borotra had made it. The former tennis champion had crossed miles of enemy-held countryside, found an American armored unit, and convinced them that a medieval castle was still under attack. The reinforcements wasted no time. Their tanks opened fire the moment they spotted SS positions. High explosive shells tore through the tree line. Machine gun nests disappeared beneath clouds of dirt and splintered timber. The sudden arrival of fresh American armor completely changed the battle. The SS had expected exhausted defenders. Instead, they were facing a growing force. Captain Jack Lee didn't wait. Forward! American soldiers charged out through the castle gate. Beside them, Major Josef Gangl led his remaining Wehrmacht soldiers. For one extraordinary moment, German soldiers wearing Wehrmacht uniforms and American infantry wearing U.S. Army helmets advanced together toward the same enemy. The SS resisted fiercely. The fighting spread through the forest. Grenades exploded among the trees. Rifles cracked from every direction. Several SS soldiers surrendered. Others refused. Many fought until they were killed. But the battle had already taken its greatest cost. During the heaviest fighting inside the castle, French statesman Paul Reynaud had moved toward an exposed position. A sniper hidden in the woods saw him. Major Josef Gangl reacted instantly. Without hesitation, he ran toward Reynaud. He pushed the former French Prime Minister behind cover. At that exact moment, the sniper fired. The bullet struck Gangl in the neck. He collapsed immediately. American medics rushed to him. There was nothing they could do. After surviving years of war on the Eastern Front, after surviving countless battles for Nazi Germany, Major Josef Gangl died defending a French prisoner. While fighting beside American soldiers against the Waffen-SS, it was one of the most extraordinary acts of courage in the final days of World War II. By midday, the battle was over. The remaining SS troops scattered into the mountains or surrendered. Castle Itter had survived. The prisoners walked out alive. For the first time in years, they were free. Captain Jack Lee looked around the courtyard. The medieval fortress was scarred by shell fire. Windows were shattered. Stone walls were chipped by bullets. The Sherman besotten, Jenny still sat outside the gate, burned and silent. American soldiers helped wounded German Wehrmacht troops. German soldiers carried wounded Americans. Just days earlier, they had been trying to kill one another. Now, they were saving each other's lives. The war in Europe officially ended 2 days later. On May 7, 1945, Germany signed its unconditional surrender. The battle for Castle Itter became one of the final engagements fought in the European theater. But history remembered it for something far more remarkable. It remains the only confirmed battle of World War II in which American forces and soldiers of the German Wehrmacht fought side by side against the Waffen-SS. Captain John C. Jack Lee Jr. received the Distinguished Service Cross for his leadership during the battle. Major Josef Gangl was honored after the war as one of Austria's national heroes. Today, streets in Austria bear his name, not because he fought for Hitler, but because, when it mattered most, he chose to stand against him. Sometimes history isn't defined by the side a man started on. It's defined by the choice he made when everything was falling apart. On one cold morning in May 1945, inside an ancient Austrian castle, former enemies made that choice together. And because they did, dozens of innocent people lived to see the end of the war. What would you have done if you were Captain Jack Lee? Would you have trusted a German officer only days before Germany surrendered? Or would you have walked away? Let us know in the comments. And if you want to hear the incredible true story of the German soldier who single-handedly saved hundreds of American POWs from the SS in the final days of the war, that's the next story. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it.